In this movie, we're going to take a look at how Ignition can streamline your VR operation. We'll start Ignition from the taskbar, and then we'll maximise the application. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I've assigned 4 roles to this Ignition instance. Normally, of course, these would be assigned to 4 individual machines. We'll have a quick overview of what these roles are about. Firstly, and most importantly, I guess, is the builder role. This is used by the graphics producer for preparing sequences. The TX role, which allows the director to choose and control the on-air sequence. The preview editor allows the producer to add explanatory text to a graphic, which will then appear on the preview screen, which is an aid for the presenter that would normally appear on a large plasma or projector on the studio floor. Let's start at the beginning with the sequence builder. On the left hand side of the screen, we've got a list of pre-existing sequences. We've got the usual search facility. Clicking any sequence in the list loads it into the timeline, where the timeline represents the ordered set of graphics in this particular sequence. Clicking any graphic in the timeline loads it into the editor and also displays it in the embedded preview. Now, in this particular implementation, we're using Viz Engine for our rendering technology, so we have an embedded Viz Engine preview. Finally, in this column, we've got a list of graphics we can add to our selected sequence, but note, however, that we can only select graphics that are applicable to the currently loaded scene. Right, let's create a new sequence. We'll click the Add New Sequence button. We'll give it a name. Right, we'll start off with a state map to set the scene. So I'm selecting state map from the graphics list, and I'm going to drag it onto the timeline. We're going to take a look at the 2008 position in Michigan. Now we're going to take a look at the popular vote in Michigan in 2008. Okay, notice when I've dragged this new share graphic onto the timeline, it's automatically inherited both the year and the state from the previous graphic. This can really help with speed and accuracy when you're building sequences. Now let's delve into the youth vote in Michigan. I'm going to drop a change onto the timeline, and I'm interested in particularly in the 18 to 29-year-old age range. And now that's the change on the 2008 change on 2004. Let's have a look at the raw 2008 figure. I'm going to drop this in before the change graphic to show you how you can insert a graphic into the timeline. And again, notice how it's inherited the correct state from the previous graphic, and it's also inherited the correct category from the next graphic in the timeline. Okay, let's finish up with the line graph. I'm going to pick up state unemployment from my graphics list and drop it onto the end of my timeline. This particular line graph is showing the unemployment in Michigan compared to the overall US level tracked over time. And you'll notice by default when we're adding a line graph to a sequence, it has 2 animate points. One that brings on the plinth and the second one that brings on the graph in its entirety. Taking a look at the editor, we'll notice that we've got 2 rows of checkboxes. The top row indicates whether we're showing a particular point on the x-axis, and the bottom row whether we're going to caption that point. So I'm going to lose 2005 from the graph, I'm not too interested in that, and I'm going to add a caption at 2008 and again at 2010. Now you'll note that each time I add a caption to the graph, we introduce an additional animate point, so that as we're queuing, as the presenter is queuing through the graphic, it will stop each time we have a caption on the graph. One other point that's worth looking at with the line graph, we have an option on how we scale the graph. And we're going to change the scale from linear to normalized, which spreads the lines, giving us a clearer view of the figures. Incidentally, the labels on the line graph are being intelligently positioned by script within the Viz scene. I'm going to add one last graphic to the scene, a wide US map right at the top. And now I'm going to play through the entire sequence using the transport buttons. Now we can see the transition logic coming into effect. This is under control of Viz script within the scene. Okay, this is the share of the vote. Onto exit poll. And then change. And lastly, the line graph. These are the animate points that we can see now that we have one animate point per caption that we've introduced onto this line graph. Okay, I'm happy with that. One last step that we need to take, we need to mark the entire sequence as ready, like so. This locks it for editing and makes it available to the TX roll ready for transmission. Before we move to the TX or director's role, I want to take a quick look at the preview screens, the presenter's aide-memoire. Let's flip over to the preview editor. Here we have our familiar list of sequences. Clicking our Michigan sequence loads it into the timeline, and here, associated with each graphic, is a text area. As the presenter clicks through the sequence, they'll see this text along with the preview of the next graphic in the sequence. I'm going to cheat a little and paste in some lorem ipsum. Right, that done, we'll look at the TX roll. This time you'll see that the sequence list is much smaller. This is because it only includes sequences marked as ready. We'll select our Michigan sequence and load it into the TX stack. Note that the TX sequence is marked with a green border. This is reflected across all roles. Note also that when we load a sequence, a snapshot is taken of all the data associated with its graphics. This allows the presenter to rehearse with a consistent set of data. To take a fresh snapshot, simply press the update button. Now the sequence is loaded, the presenter's clicker is armed and he can click through the sequence at his own pace. The director can also take control of the sequence by clicking the next button, or indeed he can flip to any graphic in the sequence. These buttons give the director control of the foreground keyer, so that as the presenter moves behind any foreground elements in the scene, for example a line graph, we can key the foreground over the top of him. Note also that as we advance through the stack, the presenter's screen shows the current graphic and what's coming next. This concludes the demo of Ignition in a VR context.